Hi, this is Misha, and I thought we would do a video on the subject matter of the semi-auto VZ.58 type guns in USA. Now, we have more than one video about the history and shooting and different things, but people keep kind of asking what are the differences. Now, obviously I don't have all the different builds and imports to show you today, but I've got a few, so thought we would just talk about them, and the ones I don't have we can always put pictures up of. Starting off here, we have relatively early D-Technik import that was reworked by Czechpoint. Over here we have my friend's very reworked Century Arms VZ.58. I wish I had more of a traditional one to show you, but that's what I could get on short notice. But somehow in a way it kind of is fitting to have a tactical one, just because of it's what a lot of these ended up looking like. Then we have a Czechpoint VZ.58 build. This is one built on a D-Technik receiver here in the USA from a parts kit by Czechpoint. And then finally we have a current C.S.A. branded import out of the Czech Republic, and I brought out the 5.56 because I thought it was kind of fitting. This is their modern tactical style. Not as crazy as that one over there, but it does have some new features and such, and it is in the 5.56 caliber. So VZ.58 itself, that rifle was standard issue in Czechoslovakia from 1959 really up until it was replaced by the 805A1 Bren beginning around 2011, and really they only phased out the VZ.58 completely in the last few years. It had a very long service life. Now, a lot of people want to call this an AK. We have a video comparing the VZ.58 to an AK, so I'll refer you to that for all the mechanical differences. I'll just say right now, the only thing these guns share with an AK is the 7.62 39 caliber, well, except for this one, of course, which is in 5.56 NATO. But otherwise, everything is different from an AK. Now, for a long time, we did not have semi-auto VZ.58s. A small batch of parts kits came in the 90s and early 2000s. This was during the assault weapons ban. Ohio Ordnance Works, probably most famous for their 1919 A4 builds and also their BAR 1918 A3 builds, built some VZ.58 semi-autos on their own milled receivers known as the VZ.2000. These are the first commercially available guns that I can recall. Now, these guns would have had the original 15.4-inch barrel, so they would have had an extension permanently attached. In addition, the assault weapons ban of the day would not have allowed for a threaded barrel anyway. Likewise, they did not have working folding stocks. Most of them were just shipped with a fixed stock. Occasionally you could see a welded open folder. And the bayonet lug was machined off the bottom of the sight base. They were able to take standard magazines though, because all of them were pre-banned. They were all pre-September 94. So that was at least good. But they were extremely expensive. I remember seeing them in catalogs around 2002, 2003. They were around $1,500, and this was at a time when most AKs were $400 or less retail. So not many people bought them. They didn't make them. They were pretty much a boutique gun. That changed in early 2007. And we'll throw up a picture here. Century Arms was the first company to import a semi-automatic rifle manufactured by D-Technik in Jablonka, Czech Republic. Now it came in, as you can see from the picture, with a actually pretty good skeleton stock. It took single stack polymer magazines, no bayonet lug. The muzzle threads were covered by an extension which was pinned on to give it an overall legal length. But the heart of the gun was intact. It was a really good gun. It had the correct finish. It was on a modern semi-auto only receiver, but it was built from mostly leftover military parts that were in excellent or refurbished condition. But Century never got into converting them. Instead, Century quickly passed the import along to Czechpoint. Now, it's interesting. Czechpoint's in Tennessee. They would partner with different companies and do different parts of the job at times for importing and converting these. They would work with C.S.A. So actually the CZ branded VZ.58s were brought to you by Czechpoint. They would also work with Waffen Works, who they would outsource some of the work to for converting. And these would go on for quite some time. The Century arms, just thumbhole stalkers, were around 800. The Czechpoint converted guns, the C.S.A. guns, were around 900 to 950 depending on configuration. Not cheap, but still considerably cheaper than the Ohio Ordnance Works. And you're getting a real Czech-made gun, not something assembled from a parts kit. Now after that, Century Arms got a large batch of parts kits and started to assemble them here. This is where the Century 2008 comes from. It's like a lot of their other builds. We have a surplus parts kit built on a US receiver with a US barrel. Now this one has been shortened, and we'll get more into the details, don't worry guys, from its original 16 inches down to 12.5 because that's what he wanted to do. But these were a typical Century Arms build. And really they're still available today. They sold them pretty hot and heavy for quite some time. They came out at around the 600, 650 price point. They got as low as 400. Then they went back up to about 700. Then they've come back down to around 400, 450. But the most recent ones that Century released were the last batches, and they were built without the original furniture, I guess because they probably ran out. Now this is a good example, even though it only recently came out of Czechpoint because they found some of the older D-Technik imports. This is a good example of the kind of conversions they were doing under the CZ brand and so on and so forth. It comes in as a single stacker. They machine out the mag weld to take double stack. They have to replace the trigger guard because the sporter does not have this bracket to hold the trigger. I mean the pistol grip. You can install a pistol grip, it just won't have the metal bracket at the top. As you see here, the side is not drilled for a scope mount. We'll get to why that's important later. It can still take stripper clips though. They have replaced the single stack bolt with a double stack and head spaced it. They've installed a folding stock on this one. They also sold it, of course, with all kinds of different stock options. Pistol grip, again, many options. Standard hand guards, these are the wood. They did all kinds as well there. There's still no bayonet lug because this was machined off for import. But they did take the extension off the barrel and permanently attached a Czech style beer can muzzle brake that gets us over 16 inches. Actually, we're about 17. This is still threaded 14x1 right hand under though, so you could unscrew it and replace it and then repin if you needed to. And they would of course refinish where necessary. This one has kind of the battleship gray finish. They've done different finishes over the years. This one pretty much is built from earlier style parts like the trigger guard. It has the unlightened bolt carrier. It does have the later style ringed. Like a lot of military guns, when these were refurbished and stuff, the parts just got mixed around. So that's pretty much how the Czech imports looked when they were sold. As this goes, this isn't a really good example of the Century because it's been so heavily modified, but imagine it with a 16-inch barrel. Here it does have the bayonet lug, and this would be workable on the full-length one. It would have a removable muzzle nut, which was 14 by 1, usually right hand. Occasionally they would put an AK thread pitch on the barrel. Now this has a US made receiver. This has a Czech. This Czech receiver is a true milled receiver. The US receiver is milled pattern, but what they did at Century to save on cost and time, it was initially a casting that was machined or milled into final shape. So this started off as a cast receiver block, and this started off just as a block of steel. So cast block and machined blocks, and then they were both milled down to their final shape. The Century gun had the 16-inch green mountain barrel, non-chrome lined, button rifled. The Czech gun would have a 15.4-inch barrel, chrome lined and hammer forged, original Czech military. And we've got one other important difference. Take this mag out. What is known as the push-down plate. This is actually very important for some people. Is that open? Okay, we got that. Get our bolt carrier out here. I love how easy these guns come apart. Let's take the Czech one out. This one's a little stiff, guys. The pin here. There we go. Get our carry out of this one. Now these look pretty similar at first glance. Striker fired, because this is the original Czech carrier. Here's the locking block system. Again, we've got a disassembly video, so. And notice the back here, how this is shaped. See? Now, if we look at this one, notice the back here, how this is shaped. See this extension that's welded on? It may not look welded, but it is. This is what Czechpoint calls a push-down plate. If you look inside, this is a striker-fired gun. See? Now, the military would have 3 positions for the selector. That would have been full, safe, semi. See? The Czechpoint has a dedicated semi group, and this is made of polymer on this version, fiberglass. Forward is semi, safe, and there's no third position because it's a dedicated. What that push-down plate is for is to prevent what's become known as the gremlin. Without it, there are sometimes issues with the striker failing to reset properly. To be fair to Century, their first guns did have the push-down plate, so they knew it was an issue. But Czechpoint sued them because it's a patented thing. And instead of purchasing a license or working out an agreement to use it, they just quit doing it in their guns because the gremlin, while it happens, is, well, a gremlin. It's intermittent. You might fire 1,000 rounds without seeing it, or you might fire 10 rounds and have it happen 3 or 4 times. It has to do with manipulating of the safety and things like that. It's just really because of it being a striker-fired gun. Now the Century does have the original metal trigger, which is nice, but it also uses both original springs. Originally there were 2, one for full auto use, and this makes a pretty, if smooth, heavy pull to the striker release. This one's actually quite heavy. The Czechpoint has only one spring, which makes for a much lighter pull. So even though this is polymer, it's much lighter. And since this isn't a hammer system, trigger hammer, it's a striker release, being polymer really doesn't seem to affect much. While we're in here, you can see where it was machined out and everything. Kind of neat. Very nice quality receiver. So internally, that's the big difference. They both use the same gas system, the same style of bolt group. All that's pretty well the same on these. But the Czech has the push-down plate and a much nicer trigger system because it's made specifically for semi-auto. Think of a semi-auto IWI, IMI Galil with a dedicated semi-auto trigger group and safety versus a Galil converted from a full auto with a full auto trigger group. Yeah, they're just nicer. They're just much. And it's gonna happen. Slick table, guys. Sorry, trying to get that lined up in the striker hole. Come on, go in the hole. There we go. Click. They even battleship grade some mags to match with these. Now the Century gun's quality really ranges wildly because of using surplus parts. They would Parkerize the guns. This one again has been refinished by my friend. I don't disagree with his decision. I think it looks better too. But originally these had the typical Century gray, black gray, kind of rough Parkerizing, which means they're just not as smooth when new because they have all that park to cut through. Also, I cannot explain completely why, but the Century guns seem to have more felt recoil. And I have three theories. None could be true, all could be true, some could be true. First is because we're using a cast machined receiver hybrid. I'm wondering about the harmonics of this receiver versus this receiver. You can tell it's not machined by just tapping it. I wonder if it's a little bit lighter or just the grain structure transmit vibrations a little differently. Second is, again, since we're using surplus parts, how worn is the return spring on this? The Czech guns pretty much all come with brand new springs, be they military surplus left over or otherwise. The Century guns are just using whatever springs they had on hand. So if you got a gun that had not been fired much, your spring is going to be a little stronger than one that had had a few thousand rounds through it. Finally, I have to wonder about the gas port size in the Green Mountain barrel. I have to wonder if maybe the gas port is a little larger than on the original Czech guns. My friend said with this 12.5-inch barrel, it runs very well and is actually more accurate than when I had the 16-inch barrel. So the fact that it's still running and he did not remount the gas port tells me if it's running with the 12-inch barrel and the same gas port size as before, that gas port was maybe a little oversized for a 16-inch barrel. Just, you know, food for thought. I said I don't know for sure. But for whatever reason, the Century guns just seem to have a little bit more felt recoil. Can't really explain it otherwise. They're good guns in the $400 range, but they're a typical Century product, so personally I wouldn't pay much more than that for them. So yeah, but this is the most common, the Century VZ.58. So that was the Century. Back to the Czechpoint guns. As I said, they partnered with C.S.A for a while, but that didn't last. C.S.A moved on to other things. They also contracted some work with Waffen Works, who is pretty much gone these days. Now Czechpoint is doing their own thing. They're importing, they're converting, and they're selling all in one. They've grown a bit. They're still quite a small company over in Tennessee, but you get the idea. As I said, the early guns were built from pretty much all surplus parts, be they... See, and one thing to add, Czechoslovakia made a lot of what they called armorers kits. They made a lot of spare parts for these guns because they were in service. So it wasn't hard to get parts that were made in the 60s or 70s, but literally never put on a gun or taken out of the wrapper. In fact, I bought a couple of the armorers kits that had mint furniture and mags and everything in them. So they used those in, you know, stockpiles for a couple of years. But the problem was, you still don't have a bayonet lug. And you still have this barrel that's a little short. Now, Czechpoint did request to the ATF if they could import a like a bayonet lug that was filled in with weld that they could unweld here in the USA, and they were denied, so that didn't work. But there are still people wanting those features. And that's where this model arises from. Pretty much the same gun. We're still on a D-Technik marked receiver. Now this receiver came into the USA as just a stripped virgin receiver. What Czechpoint did, they assembled these using parts kits with original barrels in Tennessee. Now they said they were trained and they received assistance and jigs and stuff from Czech Republic, and I have no reason to doubt that. So they would build these up as kits. They would start this in early 2015. They would do several versions. They would do with Bakelite or beaver bar furniture. They would do with the wood occasionally, with the metal stock. They would even do some more modern style with like the Magpul furniture. The reason they did it was to give the bayonet lug, basically, because some people wanted it. It is a neat feature. Now, since it has the original barrel, we again have a muzzle brake pinned on to get a legal overall length. And this one has the optional scope rail attached, which is kind of nice. So that's another variant that came from Czechpoint. They really haven't done these in a while. They're probably out of kits now. And these have the metal trigger. So what to do? Building from surplus is great as long as you have surplus parts to build from. But eventually all things run out. Now it's worth pointing that a few years back, I think 2011 or so, sorry guys, I really don't remember for sure, D-Technik's name, it changed to C.S.A, Czech Small Arms. Same company, still in Jablonka, but they just went to a more international sounding name. I get it. And they would start building some more parts themselves. The main thing was the barrel. They were running out of original barrels that were actually in good shape, and to use them, they wanted the barrels to all be basically mint bores unissued. They didn't want to use surplus barrels. They looked at making their own, but in the end, they contracted with Walther out of Germany to make the barrels. And I've heard from several people that Walther does make very, very good barrels. So they started to make new barrels for these. These are still chrome lined, still hammer forged. Now though, we're at 16 inches because we're no longer using surplus, so now we can have a removable muzzle device. Get over here, guys. See? So that's one neat feature of these newer barrels. It actually gives you the option to swap around, or for that matter, add a suppressor. And C.S.A. says that they tested both Czech-made barrels and the Walthers, and that they found the Walthers to give better accuracy. That's what they say. They also went to using modern black polymer furniture. Now, to be fair, this style of handguard was used since the very first D-Techniks coming in. These are the kind of the newer style handguards. They have the same profile as the beaver barf. They're just made out of black polymer. This has the Czech made ergonomic pistol grip. They also have a more standard shaped one, just like this, but made in black. This has the modern adjustable sliding stock, but they also offer a fixed stock that again has the same profile as this here, just in black polymer. And these have a neat little lion crest for the Czech lion on the side. This again has the scope rail. The newer C.S.A. receivers come drilled and tapped on the side for a rail, so it's easy to install. And they have a more modern kind of Parkerized phosphate Cerakote style finish versus the older kind of baked on enamel finish that was used in Czechoslovakia. So these are still made in the Czech Republic, although they're starting to be made from more new production parts as older ones run out, but they're still very high quality. Still on a true machined receiver. And they offer many versions today. There's of course the standard 7.6239. They do black polymer. They do ergonomic with the ergonomic grip. They do some with the side folding collapsing stocks. They do some with mag pull handguards and pistol grip. They still do, when they can find the furniture, some with the beaver barf, and even a few woods that pop up occasionally. They do the 5.56 as I'm holding here. It takes its own mag, which is still a rock-in style. This is the clear. There's also a black pattern. They even make an AR-15 magwell adapter. And they do pistols. They do a 12-inch pistol, which has a barrel very similar to my friend's VZ.58 you looked at, with the front sight base right up against the gas block and no buttstock. They do it in 5.56 and 7.62, and they even offer it with a SB brace, arm brace. And they do a compact pistol, which has a 7.6-inch barrel, so it's tiny, and it uses a shorter handguard and gas system. And again, that's offered with brace or not brace. So Czechpoint and C.S.A. have really taken the VZ.58 design and done their best to modernize it without really getting away from its roots, which I like. Of course, I still like the more traditional classic patterns here. So this is kind of an overview of the VZ.58s you find semi-auto in the USA. There are other builds. For example, CNC Warrior offers VZ.58 receivers, and people have built on those. Ohio Rapid Fire sold receivers and even some complete guns back in the day. So there are smaller builds, but the two big ones have always been the Century and the Czechpoint guns. So I just thought we'd do a little video trying to kind of untangle a little bit of the differences, because it's sometimes kind of confusing even to me. So yeah, we have original D-Technik import with original barrel. We have Czechpoint-USA made from all Czech parts, including receiver. And we have the modern current Czech-made C.S.A. imports with a Walther, German Walther barrel, which is the biggest difference. Again, some of the other parts like bolt carrier might start to be modern production as they run out of them, but they're still made to original specs because it's the original company with all the actual machining and blueprints and know how to do it. It's not a company trying to reverse engineer. And these all do feature the push down plate, and they'll either come with metal or the fiberglass type trigger, depending on the model, and honestly just what you request. They offer it either way. And of course, different parts will be a little different from eras of production. Open front sight, ring front sight, things like that. This has the later style forked trigger guard. This has, for example, the skinny style. Things like that will change. Yeah, the VZ.58. It's a really cool gun. If you'd like to know more about its mechanics or history, please check out those videos. And we have other Czech videos, including on the VZ.52 or the 805 Bren, which is a personal favorite of mine. As always, we really appreciate you tuning in. If you could click like and subscribe, we would really greatly appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. Let me know what I forgot to mention, and I'll do my best to either mention it or find out for you. Well, please tune in again next time. That's a nice trigger on this one. For more hopefully unique and interesting videos. We'll catch you then.